So traceability and transparency can be made through data. If you have the data from the raw material throughout the whole supply chain to the finished product, that's real transparency and traceability.
Hi everyone, I'm Martina, here with a D Factory that is Alexandra Pelka. Alexandra is a ESG consultant, head of Europe at Litehide, and she's a UNECHA expert on traceability and transparency. So here today, we're going to speak about social sustainability, as it is an extremely important part of the ESG commitments in the fashion industry. And hi, Alexandra, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Hi, and thank you very much for having me as a guest.
You're welcome. Where are you right now?
Right now, I'm in beautiful Florence, Italy, enjoying my first business trip in months. But my hometown is actually Salzburg in Austria.
Oh, that's amazing. Can you actually enjoy a trip, even because right now things are quite calm, so maybe you can even go around, have a nice day?
Yeah, the weather is wonderful. Even though everything's closed, it's just nice to stroll around. Florence is a living museum, so there's plenty to do.
Perfect. So let's tell us a little bit more about you and your job as ESG consultant and UNECHA expert on traceability and transparency.
Yeah, when I started to work in the fashion industry, I was and still am working for a startup called Litehide, which is a technology to make more sustainable leather. And we focus very strong not only on the production side, but also on the communication throughout the whole supply chain. So this is a very, very important factor for us, communication, as you already introduced. This communication between the various suppliers and suppliers of suppliers, let's say, is very fragmented and partly not even existing. So that is one of the reasons why I founded my company AP Projects, because I saw the lack of communication throughout the value chain, and I wanted to help in some way with my experience on that and improve probably steps, also focusing on ESG and SDG consultancy. So this on-site experience helped me to understand the needs inside the supply chain, but also what brands are asking for. So I just try to connect what is already there, basically. And that's also something we are focusing in the UNECE project on traceability and transparency. So we don't only want to create standards or implement new policies, but we actually want to foster the collaboration between the different stakeholders and foster transparency and traceability, basically, through open communication.
That's extremely important. So you're talking about communication as a key asset, we may say, for enabling transparency. And if I had to ask you what you can actually find, what have you actually found as difficult in your job? Which are the tricky challenges you are facing when dealing with this approach in sustainability?
So it is difficult in the way that communication often is just lost in translation. Talking to the different stakeholders, I can see that there are needs that are also misunderstandings from one stakeholder to the other. So it's basically just about creating the connection. I am unsure now if you meant what is the problem of sustainability projects in general, or the traceability throughout the supply chain. Could you re-ask that question? I'm not sure if I can respond correctly here.
Of course. I mean, you were speaking about more specifically what's the problem of that you are facing. So yes, the sustainability problems can be many, but I'm trying to ask you which are the most urgent problems that you found in your work, so specific to your experience?
So that's a question that's very much depending on the client, of course. So there's several biases that occur frequently in the regards of sustainability. I think the first very important question is to clarify what is sustainability and what does it actually mean. So asking people on the streets, for example, they would very probably respond that it has to do something with the environment. So doing good to the ambience, planting trees, producing less CO2 and so on and so forth. But it actually also includes the social and economic sustainability. So these three pillars work very closely together. And often it is a very problematic approach to sustainability, having greenwashing out there and some misinformation. Many companies just don't want to fully commit to the next steps. They are afraid of walking the walk because change also means that there are risks out there. So for me, it is important to hold hands with my clients and just show them how they could slowly make a change and transit to a more sustainable company.
That's extremely interesting. So you're saying that social sustainability is extremely important, but somehow people do not perceive this as a topic that is much important as environmental sustainability. So you told us that this problem is somehow urgent but not satisfied. So how do you approach this issue with your clients?
So again, the concept of sustainability is often misunderstood as just environmental sustainability. So what I'm trying to do is to make them understand that there are three pillars. So the environmental, the social, and the economic sustainability. And all three are important to a company because a company that is financially sustainable and stable is more attractive to investors who can then foster also other projects inside the company, such as social sustainability. The thing about social sustainability is that we don't really know 100% where, for example, garment is produced in, and also the brands don't always know the whole supply chains because, as I said, there are suppliers of the brand, but then there are suppliers of the suppliers, of course. So they're very vast steps to look at, and that's also why the data gathering is so important. So in many cases, child labor, mistreatment, all these steps need to be focused on as well, and not only the sustainable environmental sustainability part. So the very estimated approach on data could be difficult for the brand to really look through the whole value chain of their products. And having something like ESG reporting, which has a very, an approach that is basically focusing on numbers, can make a very good estimation on how the supply chain actually looks. They can benchmark and look at suppliers and also see probable issues. For example, that's one of my customers' example. We had two producers of shoes for a brand, which basically had the same amount of shoes, but a very, very different number of electricity used, working hours, etc. So they could identify that there is some issue there. They could do auditing, and then they realized that one of the companies is actually using children as a workforce. So I think ESG reporting and the benchmarking opportunities that are there can help to actually improve social sustainability as well through auditing, of course.
That's an extremely good point. And just to link to what you were saying, do you think we can speak about social sustainability without transparency in the fashion industry and without data?
No, definitely not. So traceability and transparency can be made through data. If you have the data from the raw material throughout the whole supply chain to the finished product, that's real transparency and traceability, but it also includes, as I said, workforce, it includes transportation. So it needs a very holistic approach on the whole value chain of a product and the whole process to actually get traceability and transparency out there. So traceability does not only mean, okay, the product was produced in India and is sold in America, but it actually needs the traceability throughout the whole value chain.
Amazing. And what do you think we can do, and ESG consultants can do to support companies to transition to this more transparent and data-driven business model?
There's several approaches, but a company and its board really needs to want that change, and that's, I think, the first and one of the most important steps in this journey. So integration of social and environmental concerns into a business plan, business operations and social imperatives, and measuring those not only financial but non-financial numbers, factors, help companies to actually rise the equity for about 1.5% higher than it actually is if they would not implement these ESG standards. So knowledge and competence here is a very, very important factor, and giving this competence to the brands and to the companies themselves will help us to have a better approach with ESG reporting in general. So what I'm trying to do, and what most ESG consultants try to do, is to help companies focus on the SDGs and ESG and prioritize the sheer number of data requested, all the standards that are out there, all the SDGs that can be tackled. It actually could be very difficult for a brand to create this knowledge around what actually is important to the business and to their business plan. And what we are trying to do is to take the first step, show them how it can be implemented, where to start, where to end, and how to make it sustainable. So working in a long way, let's say in the long run.
Perfect. And you mentioned two keywords. One is willingness. So you need to find a company who's really willing to transition to something that's more sustainable. And the other one is knowledge. So of course you can support companies to boost their knowledge about the topic and drive them through all the steps that are necessary. But what can you do to support those companies that are the ESGs, for instance, are not mandatory? So how can you engage even those factories that are not doing anything yet on the topic?
That is a very interesting question, also very important, because there are still companies out there that are not focusing on this aspect. But I think the pressure from consumers, but also investors, is becoming bigger and bigger. And every company needs and wants to make, first of all, the consumers, but also the investors happy. So I guess that this pressure helps to foster this process and accelerate it. So ESG reporting will be beneficial for all the companies, not only on a traceability and transparency kind of thinking, but also as financially interesting. So non-financial factors such as social KPIs and environmental sustainability will in the end be a financial factor for companies looking for investors and looking for a stable financial situation. So having this opportunity to show them, okay, if you try to comply and if you're raising your standards in this regards, it can be beneficial not only for your reputation, but also in a financial kind of way. This definitely helps. And then the other side is education. So going to the company, probably there is even only one or two people that are focusing on this and approaching more sustainable thinking. But then in the end, if you start talking to the board, if you start talking to the people working there, they actually see the advantages And that's one of the most important things, that they get the, I would not say education, that's a very strong word, but just the insights into the industry, the insights on the possibilities they have, and also then how actually easy it can be to make at least small steps, because I don't say it's, how can I say? I don't say it's easy to implement all of the standards and all the SDGs, but there are also small steps, and every single one of them makes a change.
Definitely, I totally agree. I totally agree. Do you think there will be also a change from a government perspective in terms of legislations that goes in this direction?
We can only already see that this is happening. So looking at the project of the UNECE, where we are talking about policies that could be implemented, and also standards that are imposed sometimes by the governments, there is a shift towards a more legislative kind of thinking and implementation of these standards. But on the other hand, I think it is a collaboration between government, but also the companies themselves that want to do that change. So we need to have both. We can't just implement and say, okay, you need to do this. We can't force only force the companies to make that change, but there needs to be the willingness to do so, to be a best practice model, and not only make the minimum needed to comply to the government, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I agree. And we can say that willingness is the key word for today, for really making a step forward. So here it comes the tricky question. I have a tricky question for you, and it is, if you had a magic power, what would you do to make the fashion industry more sustainable?
Oh, that's really the hardest questions of all at the moment. So if I could, I would like the people to realize that we don't have to have everything immediately, and possibly as cheap as possible. All the clothes, all the products, all the goods. The greater, the bigger, the better is for me not valid anymore. So I would love to bring back slow fashion, artisanship, and definitely natural materials. And very important, the love and appreciation for every single article we buy. I know that's not something, not really a magic power, let's say. There's no magic power needed, but we are just, and I think there is a transition towards this kind of thinking, but I just would want to have it faster, if you see what I mean. We are just too slow to go in this direction. So I hope we can accelerate this in the near future.
We cannot say it's like a time machine, because then you don't know if in the future it will work out like that or not. So you may be unsatisfied, but I agree. And slow fashion is a key word, and especially here in Italy, where craftsmanship is at the basic of what we are doing and how we are approaching fashion. And yes, maybe a step back rather than a step forward, going back to what we were doing before. And again, another question, maybe it's a little bit less difficult. Do you think technology can play a role in transitioning to this greener economy? And which role, if you agree?
Yeah, I think it definitely helps. So, for example, talking about Litehide in the beginning is one of the examples that we can reduce the environmental impact of, for example, transportation or storage of hides drastically through using a technology. So hides, for example, are a byproduct of the meat industry and would go to landfill if not used. As long as people eat meat, we just need to use what is there rather than it going to landfill. And the same happens throughout all the different industries and supply chains. So using technologies we have to make more sustainable out of products we already own, we already have, definitely would make a change. And we can and should also try to lower the impact of technologies and products and materials we already have, we already own. So we don't always have to reinvent the wheel, but using technologies to make things more sustainable and more efficient would be a key word, I would say here.
Thank you. And so last question, and we are done for today. How did you discover the ID Factory?
That's an easy one. Through a very, very interesting webinar called Technology and Sustainability, but also through a friend of mine who is also a colleague in the industry who mentioned ID Factory and actually also invited me to the webinar I just mentioned. So that was a lucky one.
Good to know. So thank you, Alexandra. It was really a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for sharing all your experience. And
thank you very much.